Hello, I am Roger Farrell, and I'm going to call this Changing Attitudes segment 16. And it has to do with colon cancer that I talked about in segment 12, but it's a different attitude. It's unusual for an organ to have more than one attitude, but my story will explain it. See, in segment 12, I talked about Victor's cancer, and it came around because of the words he kept on saying, such as, so-and-so gives him a pain in the ass, or this job burns his ass. And I had to tell him to stop talking that way, because that's what brings about the cancer. You can't insult a body and expect nothing to come back from it. It will respond. It takes that as a message. Are you telling me you want some pain in the ass? Because I will certainly give it to you. So this second attitude has to do with not letting go. Because if you think of it, the large intestine, the rectum, is where we let things go. So a lot of stuff has to do with symbolism. And when I tie symbols to somebody's symptom, I come up with an answer as to why they have the problem. And it also gives me a method of how to have the person get rid of the problem. So I'm in this particular story, a true story. My stories are always true, unless they're an analogy. So, but I have a friend, Melissa. She and I occasionally will go to a bar and have a drink, purely as a friend. She works for a lawyer that handles the investments for the money of the national hockey players. So she knows a lot about what's going on in the hockey world. And being a Canadian, I love hockey. And so a lot of other people do. So and of course the game has expanded into the States quite well. So we, but the other thing, well, first, again, the fact is that's the kind of job she has. It gives her material to pass my way, and we can discuss things privately, not in public, because she's talking about things that are quite private. But she and I can have a good conversation. So she's also been someone who will pass over to me a person that has an ailment. And this happened a few times in my recent life. And I tell her that it's hard for me when she gives me a stranger who's got to listen to me and believe what I tell them. And so when I go to visit somebody, excuse me, someone new, I have to spend an hour or two giving some background so the person can start understanding my method, my way of dealing with symptoms. So anyway, some days ago, regarding this story, Melissa asked me if I would take her north to her mother's house in Newmarket, which is about 40 minutes north of Toronto. Nice town. And I've been there a number of times because I've taken our stepfather, Phil, to the beer store. We've sat and watched hockey together with Phil and Evelyn, the mother, and sometimes with Melissa there. So it's an area, it's a family I'm familiar with. Now, I pick up Melissa at her condominium downtown Toronto, and instead of having my car, I ride with my Honda Goldwing motorcycle. And when she saw it, she yelled, "Oh my God, my mother will kill me. She'll think you're going to have an accident with that big thing." And I tell her, I never have accidents. They aren't part of my life. Yeah, I've had a lot of motorcycles. Here's my first motorcycle. I was 17 then, and I bought that motorcycle with my own money that I earned after school, working after school, and on that past summer. So, and over the years I had many. And when I was 19, I had an Indian used. My motorcycles are usually used, as a lot of my cars through life have been used purchases. I do now and then buy new cars. I've had Harley Davidsons, I had Kawasaki's, I've had just about every make, but not at the same time. I see a different bike I like and I get rid of the one I've got and buy the other one. So anyway, we arrive at Evelyn's house, and sure enough, she gets upset. She goes to her husband and says, "You know what? Roger brought Melissa up on his motorcycle. He could have killed my daughter." Yeah, and Phil just nods. He's reading the newspaper. So Melissa suggests that her mom and I go to the sunroom and have a chat, which we do. And in there, Evelyn starts off by telling me, "Melissa says you want to see if you can help me with my cancer that I've been fighting with." So those 2 or 3 words are not words I want to be used when considering an ailment. I don't want to fight my ailment. I don't want that said. We're not there to fight ailments. We're there to get their agreement with what we're trying to impose upon them in our own gentle way. Suggestion by suggestion. So I tell Evelyn, I say, "Evelyn, fighting an ailment is not helpful." And she says, "You have to fight. They say so. You gotta fight. That's what you gotta do." I said, "Well, fighting an ailment only makes it stronger. And if we believe it's an item we gotta fight, we lose our strength relative to it." "Oh, you gotta fight," she says. But I tell Evelyn, concentrating on your symptom only strengthens that. And that's not advisable. Well, you gotta do it, she says. I said, you know, I'm going to give you a little story that I want you to repeat several times in the morning and in the noon, and that's nighttime. It's a made-up story. But what you do is you imagine that you become a miniature Evelyn. Small, small, small. And you slide into that part that's cancerous. And you go into a bedroom there and find a visitor under the blankets sleeping. And that visitor's name is Mr. Cancer. So you rip up the blankets, throw them on the floor, and you tell the man, here's your hat, there's the door, get going, you're finished, your visit's over. And the man dons his hat and leaves the door. And then you say, okay, that's it, done. And that can start the idea of the input we want to give that symptom. Evelyn bursts out saying, that is the nuttiest thing I've ever heard. I said, as nutty as it is, it can have an effect. So, but I'm getting the impression because Evelyn's got a very standoffish attitude. She folds her arms when talking to me as if she didn't want to hear anything from me. So I figured, while I'm in the middle of this discussion with her, I figure Melissa must have told her mother that she's going to bring me up to give some advice. And the mother probably said, don't you do that. I don't need any advice. But Melissa disobeyed the mother, and now out of spite, the mother is taking it out on me and closing her ears down to anything I've got to say, which I've said a lot more than I'm telling you right now. I'm actually talking about fighting. I realize I'm fighting her own system. And in the middle of a conversation, she says, by the way, my sister's going to arrive here in about 12 minutes, so make it short. I can't talk healing procedures to somebody that's got a time limit. So I say to Evelyn, you know, there is a faster way for us to get your cancer to remove itself. And she says, how do we do that? She's actually smiling. Yeah, hooray. And I said, by you stop mothering your children. And she says, stop mothering them? How can I stop mothering them? I'm their mother. I said, yes, I know that. I'm not denying that. But your daughter's 39. Your son is 37. Got a nice wife, 2 children, a house on the Lake Simcoe in Keswick. And they're doing fine, both of them. Melissa has a nice condominium apartment down in the center of Toronto, near where she works. So they're doing fine. But you're constantly, and when I'm around and I hear you, either I'm with you or I'm with Melissa, and I hear you counseling her, and be careful of this, and watch out for that, and I'm sure you do that with your son also. And that's what I mean, you're mothering them. They're no longer 12 or 14 years old. You've got to stop doing that. She says, if I stop mothering them, well, actually, tell me, how do I stop mothering them? I am their mother, you know. I know that. I said, but they're grown up. And I realized while I'm talking to her or listening to her that she has no profession, no job. She's probably never had a job in her life. So these kids are her only job. They're her only function. I mean, what can she do with Phil? Watch TV, that's about it. But she has no control over any portion of what she does as her duty. So she takes and creates a control factor over her 2 adult children. And I tell her, I said, you know, symbolically, the large intestine is a part of our body that lets go of refuse, lets go of the remains of unwanted stuff. Okay, but you, as again symbolically, are not letting your mothering aspects go. You're not letting them get flushed away and get down to a more normal mom and child relationship, adult child relationship. And she says, I can't stop mothering them. I'm their mother. I said, but you can tone it down. Tone it down. You know, you're not letting go is causing the intestine, the large intestine, to not let go. You know, and then there's stuff collecting in there, and it's turning into uglier and uglier stuff, and it affects the intestine walls. She's, well, I can't let go. And I said, Evelyn, if you don't let go, your cancer will get worse. She says, it can't get much worse. It's already, I'm told, getting into other parts of my body. I said, that can change. The rectum can heal. You change your way of looking at things. Change your way of being a mother and not being a mothering mother. Well, she tells me, she says, are you telling me that if I don't change my ways, I'll die? I said, I didn't say that. She says, well, I won't change my ways, even if it means I'll die. I'm shocked, so shocked. I know that whatever I have to say and did say just went in one ear and out the other, and maybe wasn't even allowed to go in one ear to get to the other. So a sad situation, and I assumed that she's somebody that needs something to be in charge of, and that's what's given her the negative aspect and brought about the cancer. And it's so sad, very sad, because she is a nice person. I've had many talks with her over a tea or coffee, as I have with Phil, and of course I have a lot of talks with Melissa. So it's Melissa I'm concerned with, because if Evelyn isn't going to take any advice from me, Melissa will eventually be without her life being around, without her mother being around. Anyway, I had a lot to think of as I drove back to Toronto with Melissa in the back. And that's the point. When we have an ailment, it had to come around because of our type of thinking, our attitude. And as I also said at the beginning, the attitude here is a different attitude from Victor's attitude. Both of them affect the intestine. I don't see two attitudes with the stomach or with the kidney. So it's kind of new and unusual for me. I'm still learning. At that time, I was still learning. And at this time, I also still am learning, as I hope you are too. So enjoy your balance of your day. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.